success, especially in the world of sports.
Well, I'm always up for a good underdog story. So
Right.
where do we begin?
Let's start with this intriguing little cultural concept called janteloven, which basically translates to don't think you're better than anyone else.
Don't think you're better than anyone else. That's an interesting starting point for a conversation about success.
Right. You'd think it would be a recipe for mediocrity, but then you look at Norway's track record, especially in athletics, and it's like, wait a minute, something's not adding up.
It's that classic paradox, humility as a catalyst for achievement. And one of the sources we have actually shares a personal story about growing up in Røros, this small town in Norway.
Okay, tell me more.
So the author talks about how these janteloven principles were practically woven into the fabric of daily life. Like their mother instilled this deep-seated belief in community over individual achievement.
But how do you reconcile that with someone like Karsten Warholm, the world champion hurdler who's known for his almost superhuman work ethic? The guy's a machine.
Exactly. Warholm is a fascinating case study because on the surface, he seems to embody that individual drive, that relentless pursuit of excellence.
But there's got to be more to it than that, right?
Right. And this is where it gets interesting. See, Norway seems to be shifting, not completely abandoning, but definitely evolving their relationship with self-belief, especially when it comes to elite sports. It's like they're finding this balance between humility and confidence, this quiet self-assurance that fuels their performance without sacrificing their values.
So it's not about suppressing ambition, it's about channeling it in a way that aligns with their cultural values.
Exactly. And Warholm, despite his incredible drive, is still deeply rooted in his community. I mean, he's still a dedicated member of his hometown club, Dimna IL.
It's like they've cracked the code on being both fiercely competitive and fiercely loyal. Which brings us to another intriguing figure, Petter Northug, the champion skier who definitely wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Ah, Northug, the enfant terrible of Norwegian skiing. He really embodies that tension, doesn't he?
Right. Like, was he a product of Janteloven's demise or just this rare breed who thrived in spite of it?
It's a question that sparked a lot of debate in Norway. Because on one hand, you have this incredibly gifted athlete who pushed boundaries and challenged the status quo.
And on the other hand, you have this deeply ingrained cultural norm that says, don't get too big for your britches.
Exactly. And Northug's story really highlights that tension between individual talent and cultural expectations. It makes you wonder, is there a way to reconcile the two?
And then you have Caroline Graham Hansen, the soccer star whose perceived arrogance really ignited a firestorm in Norway.
Hansen's story is particularly interesting because it goes beyond just confidence versus arrogance.
What do you mean?
Well, some people argue that it was actually a lack of confidence, this fear of violating those deeply ingrained cultural norms that ultimately hindered her career.
So instead of being held back by arrogance, she was held back by self-doubt.
In a way, yes. And it really makes you wonder how many other incredibly talented individuals might be out there holding themselves back for fear of standing out too much.
It's a good reminder that things aren't always as they appear, right? What we perceive as confidence or arrogance might actually be rooted in something much deeper and more complex.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about your own life, your own field. How do you balance that desire to excel with the need to be a team player, to not make waves? It's a delicate dance. It really is. But speaking of navigating tricky terrain, let's talk about Norway's approach to developing elite athletes. They seem to have this whole long game mentality figured out.
Ah, yes. Long-term athlete development, or LTAD, as the experts call it. It's all about building a broad foundation of skills early on instead of pushing for specialization too soon.
Yeah, and the sources we have are pretty clear about the potential downsides of going all in on one sport too early.
Like burnout.
Burnout, injuries, even this thing called the Matthew effect.
Matthew effect.
Yeah, the rich get richer, where early advantages tend to snowball, leaving those late bloomers in the dust.
Ah, I see. So it's about leveling the playing field, giving everyone a chance to develop at their own pace.
Exactly. And while Norway seems to be doing a great job of nurturing talent from a young age, the research suggests they might be missing out on some of those late bloomers.
So it's about finding a balance, right? Between early development and recognizing that talent can blossom at any age.
Exactly. And it's not just about the when, but also the how.
How? Well, take Merit Bjørgen, the champion skier. She's a perfect example of this long game approach. She didn't grow up laser-focused on skiing. She played handball, too, had this incredibly supportive figure in her life, Idar Terje Belsvik, who made sure she had good skis even when her family couldn't afford them. It's that classic underdog story.
It's about creating an environment where talent can flourish, right? Where
Mhm.
it's not just about winning, but about developing a love for the sport, for the journey.
Exactly. And then you have Erling Haaland, the soccer phenom, who's a perfect example of early specialization. I mean, the guy was practically born with a soccer ball at his feet.
Two very different paths,
Yeah.
both leading to incredible success. It really highlights that there's no one-size-fits-all approach, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that brings up another fascinating aspect of this Viking Code, this concept of micro-ambitions.
Micro-ambitions, that sounds almost un-Viking-like.
Right. You'd think they'd be all about those epic quests and conquering new worlds, but it turns out even Vikings break things down into manageable chunks.
So it's about having a vision, but also having a plan.
Exactly. And the Ingebrigtsen brothers, those world-class runners, their story really brings this concept to life. Their father, Gjert, was legendary for his coaching style. This intense focus on daily discipline, on incremental progress. It wasn't about chasing some far-off finish line, but about winning each day, one step at a time.
And those small victories, those micro-achievements, they add up, don't they? They create momentum, build confidence.
They're like the building blocks of something much bigger. And then you have Ole Einar Arbjørndalen, the biathlete who took meticulousness to a whole new level.
How do you mean?
The guy converted a truck into an altitude training bedroom.
No way.
It's a perfect example of how those tiny optimizations, those seemingly insignificant details, can make all the difference.
Like they say, Rome wasn't built in a day.
Or in this case, Oslo wasn't built in a day.
Touché. And it's a good reminder for all of us, isn't it, that even the most ambitious goals are achievable if we break them down into those manageable bite-sized pieces. It's about focusing on what we can control, on making progress one step at a time.
You know, all this talk about discipline and meticulousness, it makes you wonder if there's even room for fun in this whole Viking Code equation.
Well, you might be surprised to hear this, but play, and I'm not talking about just taking a break from training, actually plays a crucial role in Norwegian success, both on and off the field.
Really? So it's not all just work, work, work. There's room for some goofing off.
Not exactly goofing off, but definitely tapping into that intrinsic joy in what you do. You see, play isn't just about letting loose. It's about tapping into this almost childlike enthusiasm that fuels motivation, prevents burnout, and unlocks creativity.
It's like that saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life.
Exactly. And play provides this safe space for experimentation, for taking risks, for learning from your mistakes, all without the fear of failure that can stifle creativity.
It's like those jazz musicians who just jam, you know? They're not afraid to try new things, to go off script, and that's where the magic happens.
Exactly. And sometimes those seemingly random explorations lead to breakthroughs. Remember that story about Stoll, the basketball player who won a championship with this totally unorthodox, almost naive shot?
Right. Everyone thought he was crazy, but it worked.
That's the power of play. It allows us to tap into this instinctive brilliance that we often stifle with overthinking.
It's like sometimes you just gotta trust your gut.
And speaking of trusting your gut, let's talk about Victor Hovland, the professional golfer.
Oh, yeah. He's a great example of someone who seems to genuinely love the game.
Exactly. He's achieved incredible success, yet he still approaches golf with this infectious joy. Remember when he surprised everyone by caddying for his former roommate at the U.S. Open?
Right. That wasn't just some PR stunt. That was genuine camaraderie and love for the game shining through.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can all learn from, regardless of our profession. How can we bring more playfulness into our own work, into our passions? How can we rediscover that joy that drew us to these pursuits in the first place?
It's about finding those moments of pure, unadulterated fun in everything we do, right?
Precisely. But let's not forget about the power of teamwork, or in this case, dugnad. It's this deeply ingrained cultural value in Norway that emphasizes community, shared responsibility, everyone pitching in for the greater good.
Right, like that whole it takes a village mentality.
Exactly. The source material talks about how dugnad has been essential for survival in Norway, especially in those rural communities facing harsh winters or recovering from natural disasters. It's about coming together, helping your neighbor, knowing that you're not alone.
And it's not just some quaint tradition either, right? This whole dugnad spirit was alive and well during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely. They even had this term for it, Nasjonal Koronadugnad.
National Corona Dugnad.
Yeah, it was this nationwide effort to combat the virus. People understood that their individual actions, wearing masks, social distancing, getting vaccinated, had a direct impact on the collective well-being.
It's like that old wartime propaganda, loose lips sink ships.
Well, not exactly, but you get the idea. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that our individual choices have consequences for the collective.
So it's about taking responsibility not just for ourselves, but for each other.
Precisely. And that's a powerful concept, isn't it? This idea that we all have a role to play in creating a better future, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. It's about thinking beyond our own immediate needs and considering the well-being of the collective. And I think that's a message that resonates far beyond the borders of Norway.
It's a universal value, really, a sense of shared humanity. But it's one thing to talk about these values, these ideals. It's another thing to actually live them, to put them into practice. And that's what I find so fascinating about the Viking Code. It's not just some abstract philosophy, it's a way of life. And it seems to be working pretty well for them, wouldn't you say?
I'd say so. And what's really exciting is how these principles, this blend of individual ambition, long-term vision, embracing play, and collective effort, they're not limited to athletics, or even to Norway for that matter. They're applicable to any field, any endeavor where success is the goal.
So it's not just about winning gold medals or topping the charts, it's about building a better world.
Precisely. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this Viking Code. Its potential to not only achieve success, but to actually make a difference in the world.
It's like they've taken those classic Viking values of courage, resilience, and community and given them a 21st century upgrade.
Absolutely. And speaking of upgrades, that brings us to another key theme that emerges from this Viking Code, this recognition that technology plays a crucial role in shaping a better future.
Okay, so we're not just talking about longboats and axes anymore. We're talking about innovation, about using technology to solve some of the world's most pressing problems.
Exactly. And it's not just about developing cool gadgets, it's about using technology to empower people, to create opportunities, to build a more equitable and sustainable world.
And the source material is full of examples of Norwegians doing just that. Like Daya, the digital platform they've developed in Ukraine. It's allowing citizens to access government services, manage their finances, even vote online, all with incredible efficiency and transparency.
It's a perfect example of how technology can be used to create a more citizen-centric, more responsive government.
It makes you wonder why some other more developed countries are dragging their feet when it comes to embracing these kinds of innovative solutions.
Well, change can be scary, right? And sometimes the systems we have in place, even if they're outdated, they benefit certain groups who are resistant to change. But the source material doesn't shy away from the challenges either.
What do you mean?
Well, take the whole debate around electric vehicles, for example. It's a crucial step towards a greener future, but it also raises a lot of questions.
Like what?
Like, what's the environmental impact of battery production? How do we ensure the ethical sourcing of materials like lithium and cobalt? What about the development of alternative fuel sources, like hydrogen?
So it's not as simple as just swapping out gas guzzlers for electric cars.
Exactly. It's about looking at the whole system, considering the unintended consequences, and finding solutions that are both sustainable and equitable. And speaking of equity, the source material also highlights the importance of addressing social justice issues as we navigate this technological revolution.
Because technology isn't neutral, right? It can be used to amplify existing inequalities, or it can be a force for good.
Precisely. And the Viking Code, with its emphasis on community, on shared responsibility, offers a framework for using technology in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
So it's about ensuring that everyone has access to the tools and opportunities that technology provides.
Exactly. And it's about having those difficult conversations about how technology is impacting our lives, our communities, our planet. Because the choices we make today will have far-reaching consequences for generations to come.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, that we have a shared responsibility to use these powerful tools wisely, ethically, and for the benefit of all humankind.
Well said. And ultimately, that's what this Viking Code is all about. It's not just a set of rules or principles, it's a mindset, a way of approaching the world with courage, resilience, ingenuity, and a deep sense of community.
It's about embracing the unknown, facing challenges head-on, and never losing sight of the greater good.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by tapping into that Viking Code within all of us, we can actually build a future that's worthy of those epic sagas.
A future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, to reach their full potential, and to contribute to something bigger than themselves. That's a future I think we can all get behind.
Absolutely.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the Viking Code. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey.
Love what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with others. Your support fuels the journey for more awesome content.